Am I the antagonist for taking my wife's side? For some background, my wife and I, both 26 years old, are lesbians living in a conservative state. This incident occurred last month, and it continues to cause problems. A few weeks before Thanksgiving, we found out that several young nieces and nephews would be visiting. The last time we saw any of them was when they were babies, so we were excited to see them again. A couple of days before Thanksgiving, my mother called us to discuss dinner arrangements. She mentioned that she planned on introducing my wife and me as friends. "This is your aunt's friend." Name. We both felt uncomfortable and questioned my mother about it. She explained that she didn't want to confuse the kids at such a young age. I suggested that she introduce us properly, and if the kids had any questions, she could explain later or use the phrase, "I'll tell you when you're older." My wife and I would have been okay with that compromise. However, my mother insisted on her initial plan and refused to find a middle ground. Then she asked us why it was such a big deal. We explained that we are married, not just friends. Introducing us as friends would be disrespectful to our marriage and to us. Just like any other couple present, we deserve to be recognized as a couple. We would have to interact differently with each other and pretend to be friends, when in reality we are much more. The fact that my mother unilaterally decided this without asking us for our opinion added to our discomfort. Unfortunately, our arguments didn't convince her, as she was determined to protect the kids. In response, my wife calmly stated that if we couldn't be treated equally, then we wouldn't attend. I supported my wife's decision and sided with her. We didn't speak to my mother rudely or disrespectfully. However, this made my mother furious. She complained about having bought enough food for everyone, including us, and about preparing our favorite side dishes. I explained that it would all be pointless if she constantly created a divide between us, and I apologized for taking my wife's side. Finally, she hung up. We ended up having our own Thanksgiving celebration with my wife's family and many of our friends. Since then, my mother hasn't let go of the issue. She constantly blows up my phone, guilt-tripping me and mentioning how everyone was asking about our absence, wrongly claiming that we bailed at the last minute. It is now December, and she brings it up at least twice a day. This situation is making me question if I was wrong and if I should have discussed it further with my wife. However, I truly didn't know what else to do. So am I the asshole here? You and your wife are not in the wrong here. Your mother's insistence on introducing you as friends and refusing to acknowledge your marriage is disrespectful and hurtful. It's understandable that you both felt uncomfortable and didn't want to attend the Thanksgiving dinner under those conditions. You tried to find a compromise by suggesting that your mother introduce you properly and address any potential questions from the kids later. However, your mother's refusal to consider this compromise shows a lack of respect for your relationship. Your decision to prioritize your wife and your own well-being is completely valid. It's important to stand up for your marriage and set boundaries when it comes to how you are treated and recognized. Your mother's constant guilt-tripping and attempts to make you feel responsible for her frustration are unfair. It may be helpful to have a calm conversation with your mother, explaining why her actions hurt you, and emphasizing the importance of treating you and your wife as a couple. However, ultimately, it's up to her to change her attitude and behavior. Am I the antagonist for telling my half-sister she and her siblings can figure out shit with dad on their own? I am a 36-year-old woman with a brother who is 38 years old. We also have 3 half-siblings from our dad's second marriage who are 25-year-old female, 23-year-old male, and 21-year-old male. Unfortunately, we lost our mother when we were children. Our dad took about a year and then told us it was enough time hanging on to the past. He remarried less than 2 years after our mom's death and believed that once people pass away, they should be left in the past after a certain period of time. According to him, we should focus on filling their roles and replacing them as much as possible. This mentality was very uncomfortable for both my brother and me. Our dad would become extremely frustrated whenever we didn't conform to his idea of moving on. His second wife shared the same mindset and strongly encouraged us to do the same. When she was pregnant with our half-sister, she insisted that it wouldn't be fair for the baby to be born into a divided family. She wanted my brother and me to accept her as our new mom who had taken our real mom's place. To make matters worse, our dad supported her in this belief. My brother and I were never particularly close to our half-siblings. They adopted their parents' view that we should leave our mom in the past and fully accept our new mom. They even blamed us for people knowing that we were a blended family rather than a traditional nuclear family. I personally didn't care, and my brother found amusement in seeing our dad and stepmother embarrassed when they claimed we were her children, revealing that she was just our stepmother at best and more like our dad's wife. A few months ago, the second wife passed away, and our half-siblings believed that our dad would remain a widower for the rest of his life, out of love for their mom. They wanted to discuss the possibility of one of them living with dad or him moving in with our half-sister. However, dad informed them that he was already searching for a new wife. This news drove our half-siblings crazy, and they tried to involve my brother and me. However, this matter has nothing to do with us. We haven't spoken to our dad in almost 2 decades, and we have limited contact with our half-siblings. Out of the blue, my half-sister approached me to have a face-to-face conversation about this situation. She asserted that as the only 2 girls, we should stand against our dad's replacement actions, claiming it was unfair to their mom. She requested our support in confronting our dad and stopping him. I made it clear that this was not our concern and reminded her that Dad had already replaced our mom, so I wouldn't care if he replaced someone I never cared about. She insisted that I should care and praised her mom's exceptional role in raising my brother and me. In response, I pointed out that she and her brothers are adults who are older than my brother and me were when we lost our mom and dad remarried. Therefore, they should be capable of dealing with our dad on their own without our assistance. I stressed that I would not be offering any help in this matter. As a result, I was called a terrible sister, person, and daughter, and was heavily criticized. So was I in the wrong here? You are not obligated to get involved in a situation that has nothing to do with you. Your half-siblings are adults and capable of addressing their concerns with your father on their own. You have made it clear that you have distanced yourself from your dad and half-siblings for almost 2 decades. So their expectations that you would intervene in this matter are unreasonable. It is understandable that your past experiences with your father's mindset regarding replacing your mother may influence your lack of interest or concern in this situation. Ultimately, it is your choice how involved you want to be in your family dynamics, and it seems you have made a decision that works best for you. Am I the antagonist for wanting to ruin my family's Christmas with my vegan feast? I have been lactose intolerant since I was 11 years old. Whenever we visited my grandma, she would cook us a meal. Despite us clearly explaining my intolerance to her, she never made anything for me. I would end up eating plain rice or similar meals. My grandma didn't have memory issues. She simply didn't want to make extra effort by cooking a different dish or altering the planned meal. I didn't say anything because I dislike conflicts, and I didn't mind going hungry as long as I could spend time with family. Before leaving, my mother would calmly tell my grandma that what she did was disrespectful and made me sad. Later, my aunt, her son, and her husband moved in with my grandma. My aunt, having worked in the dairy industry and having friends with children who had food allergies, was educated about lactose intolerance. Despite this, when they moved in, nothing changed for me. They still didn't make anything for me. After several years of this, my mother had enough and called my grandma, threatening that she would never see me again if she didn't prepare at least one dish for me next time we visited. I was unaware of this phone call and hoped that they would start caring enough to cook something I could eat. From that point on, I always had something to eat. In 2020, I became vegan and informed my family ahead of time. When my aunt's family moved to a different place, they still continued to cook meals 50/50ths when we visited. It didn't cost them more to make vegan-friendly food because they didn't buy any special substitutes. They simply made the same meal without animal products. Although I didn't expect them to, I mention this to show that my dietary choice didn't affect their finances. During Christmas, my grandma would alternate between coming to our house or going to my aunt's house, and on the 25th, the other side of the family would visit the house grandma stayed at, and we would prepare a delicious holiday feast. The last time it was our turn to celebrate with Grandma, my mother, who is not vegan, decided to make a plant-based feast for the family. Everyone enjoyed it. Now that I know how to cook and see how hard my mother works during the holidays, I've decided to take on the responsibility so that she can relax. I choose not to cook meat and have no desire to. When my aunt found out that there wouldn't be any meat at the family gathering, she got angry at me and called me selfish because I am the only vegan in the family. I asked her children and Grandma if they had any issues with a vegan meal, and they didn't. She prioritizes satisfying guests and doesn't understand why she can't receive the same attention in return. I find it rude that she criticized my Christmas menu almost 20 days before Christmas and complained about the food when I haven't even decided what I'm going to make yet. Her oldest son keeps sending me vegan recipes, excited about having a vegan Christmas. Personally, I find it difficult to watch people consume dead animals, so having a vegan Christmas would be a gift for me. Am I the one who's wrong for not changing my mind? It is clear that your aunt and grandmother have consistently disregarded your dietary needs and preferences in the past, despite being educated on the subject. It is unfair for them to expect special accommodations for their preferences while not extending the same courtesy to you. You have every right to prepare a vegan meal for Christmas, especially since it is your turn to host and you are doing it out of consideration for your mother. Your aunt's anger and criticism are unjustified. Your decision to stick to your vegan beliefs and prioritize your own values is completely valid. Aita for falling asleep while my sister was in active labor and then leaving once visitors started to arrive after the birth of her child. I, a 28-year-old female, was one of 2 support persons for my sister, who is 26 years old, when she was at the hospital delivering my nephew. This was her first time being pregnant, and although the dad was involved, they were not in a relationship at the time. For simplicity, I will refer to him as the baby daddy, but please note that they are together and happy now. 4 years ago, my sister went into labor at noon and gave birth around 7 a.m. the next morning. At the time, I was living out of town and flew in a week before her due date to help her prepare for the birth, as the baby daddy was not living with her. When it was time to go to the hospital, I drove her and stayed with her, even though she was not dilated enough to be admitted. The baby daddy arrived sometime after supper when my sister was admitted, and I took a short break but promptly came back to support her. By this point, she had been on several types of painkillers, including laughing gas and morphine, which helped her cope. However, her labor was long and difficult. When my sister was ready to push, it was between 4 and 5 a.m. At this point, I was sitting on the couch in the delivery room, while the baby daddy was holding her hand and supporting her. I unintentionally dozed off for about 20 minutes during this time because I wasn't needed right then. Soon after, my sister had to undergo an emergency C-section, and I wasn't allowed to be there as only one support person was permitted. I waited in the hospital waiting room alone for nearly 3 hours after my nephew was born, eagerly waiting to go back and support my sister and the new baby. I stayed at the hospital until almost 4 p.m. the next day before going to my sister's place to shower and sleep. My sister has never let me live down the fact that I fell asleep while she was in labor. It bothers her to this day, even though my nephew is almost 4 years old now. She is also upset that I left her to go home and sleep after our family and other visitors arrived at the hospital, thinking it was an appropriate time. I did my best, or at least what I thought was my best. Recently, I found out that I am pregnant, and my sister won't stop bringing up everything I did wrong during her labor and delivery. I don't know if it's just hormones, but it is driving me crazy. I believe I did the best I could for her, being with her the entire time and staying with her for a whole week after my nephew's arrival. Am I the one at fault for falling asleep and eventually wanting to go to sleep? Or is she justified in being upset that I dozed off and left, despite the presence of visitors like our parents and the baby daddy? You were there for your sister throughout her labor and delivery, despite living out of town and making arrangements to be with her during this important time. You provided support and assistance, even driving her to the hospital and waiting with her during the initial stages. Falling asleep for a brief period does not make you an asshole. Labor can be a long and exhausting process, and it's understandable that you may have been fatigued after being there for such an extended period of time. You cannot be expected to be fully alert and awake every single moment. Moreover, it was not your decision to leave and go home to sleep. You did what you thought was appropriate, especially considering that other family members and visitors had arrived at the hospital. It's unfair for your sister to hold this against you, especially since you were already there for her for a whole week after her nephew's arrival. Your sister's continued focus on your actions during her labor and delivery, especially as you are now pregnant and may be experiencing your own hormonal changes, seems excessive. It's important for you to communicate with her and explain how her constant reminders are affecting you. A gentle conversation about your feelings and the impact of her words may help resolve the situation and foster a healthier relationship moving forward.